Are you ashamed of anything you have done? It's tempting, isn't it, to say no, to sidestep the discomfort that comes with admitting to shame. But if we're honest with ourselves, we all harbor some form of shame. We even express concern when people seem to lack it entirely. Do they have no shame? We say, knowing the insinuation. So could it be that shame may not be entirely bad? But before we get to that, what is shame? In the academic literature, shame is considered a self-conscious emotion, usually involving a negative evaluation of oneself or one's behavior, usually arising from a moral or social transgression. I find this definition impersonal. Shame is an invasively painful emotion, one that creeps into our most private moments and whispers in our ear that we are a failure, that we are deeply flawed. And although it's universally felt, we're reluctant to acknowledge it. People are perfectly happy to share how perfect their lives are, but shame remains hidden, unspoken. So when we feel it, we think, is there something wrong with me? Am I alone in this? There is nothing wrong with you. Your shame makes you human. We might not wear it proud on the outside like a smile, but we all know how it feels to carry its weight. And I know very well how heavy that weight can be because I have shame. I might be stood here today as a professional, but when I was 16 years old, I was a drug addict. You see, I grew up as the weird dyslexic girl that brought cuddly toys to school. I was used to bullies. I was used to people pretending to be my friend or pretending to ask me out just to realize I was on the wrong end of a who can get the biggest loser competition. What I wasn't used to is people wanting to be my friend. So as I got a bit older and taking drugs was the entry criteria for my new friend group, you bet I obliged. The bigger problem was I'd been fighting a battle with my mental health since I could remember, and the drugs made the noise go away. For a time, because when I was 17 years old, I remember standing over the bathroom sink, shaking, sweating from withdrawals, nose bleeding down my neck. And I realized that the person in the mirror was going to kill me. So I looked at myself and I said, that's enough. I've come a long way since then. And over the years, I've achieved things that 16-year-old me never believed possible. But for a time, the more I accomplished, the worse I felt. I felt like a fraud. I couldn't look back to celebrate any of my accomplishments because what if I caught a glimpse of 17-year-old me in the mirror? A glimpse of my shameful past. Each time you feel shame, you're faced with that same choice. You can face it, or you can hide from it. Maybe the cause of my shame is different than yours, but most of us are hiding from something we have done, said, seen, something we know we are capable of, but wish we weren't. But our emotions are not designed to be ignored. Consider this. Despite accounting for only 2% of the body's weight, the brain takes up 20% of our energy consumption. This small organ, constantly overworked, does not expend energy frivolously. Every emotion that we feel is the result of the brain's deliberate allocation of precious resources. So maybe shame serves a function, but its discomfort masks its presence. So let's just take a step back for a second and think about it. Human beings possess a wondrous capability to self-reflect. When we're living up to our expectations, that's immensely empowering. But we don't always like what we see. Sometimes the person looking back at us is lost, out of control, not living up to expectations. And with that comes shame. So you could argue that shame is just a side effect of this reflective intelligence, but I strongly disagree. And researchers have argued that shame is a central component to our moral awareness. In a compelling article titled "Shame in Self and Society," the author argues that shame might just be our moral gyroscope. For example, if a moral transgression gives rise to feelings of shame, we are more likely to try and make amends with those who have been wronged compared to when no shame is felt. Likewise, shame motivates pro-social behaviors by making selfish behaviors less appealing. And it also serves us in a way that no other emotion can, because it helps regulate every other emotion. Think about it. If you feel angry, overjoyed, jealous, but are ashamed of how you feel, it's a signal that that emotion may be inappropriate, so its expression will be suppressed. So it helps keep us in check. Why then does it have such a bad reputation? And why is it debilitating for some, but motivating for others? The problem isn't the existence of shame, it's the target. When we behave in ways we regret, instead of looking back and thinking the behavior was bad, we think, I am bad. I didn't do a bad thing, I am bad. We then appraise the behavior as indicative of our worthiness. I am bad because I am worthless. I am unlovable. And this self-judgment creates a paralyzing belief. What's the point in striving for change if the problem is who I am at my core? Now, it is good to take responsibility for our actions, but not every one of our actions in the past defines who we are in the present or who we could be in the future. Good people do bad things, and bad people do good things. But we do need to ask ourselves, why did I do it? If that behavior was in line with who I wanted to be, shame wouldn't be felt. It would be felt as guilt. That shame is a signal, and it's telling you that something needs to change, and it's time to face it. But this isn't a journey you have to do alone. I urge you to seek support of friends and family, as well as mental health professionals. But that being said, even the most amazing clinician can't brute force you into healing. They can show you where to safely step, but you have to be the one putting one foot in front of the other. And if you don't think that mindset plays an important role, then consider this. The way we talk to ourselves affects our hormonal response patterns. When we tell ourselves we're not good enough, strong enough, smart enough, it increases cortisol and adrenaline, and it sends our bodies into an increased stress state. When we swap out that negative self-talk for positive self-talk, we pave the way for healthier emotional regulation. I am bad becomes I did a bad thing. Now, this is easy in theory, but in practice, it's much harder. So how do we make that shift? Most of you are probably familiar with the saying, fake it till you make it. Now, I have a love-hate relationship with this saying, and there's a lot of different interpretations. But here's my take. When I say fake it, I don't mean suppressing emotions. I am not saying, oh, you feel sad? Pretend you don't. Oh, you have depression? Pretend you don't. What I am talking about is the active role that our behaviors play in our emotions. Feel the emotion, fake the behavior. Now, that might sound confusing, so let me explain. I had been on the run for my shame for a long time, starting with the drugs, but over the years, I had built up a shameful collection of things I had done. Things that had been done to me against my will, and things I wish I had done, but I hadn't. I couldn't face these things. So I put them in a box, I locked the box, and I put the box in the back of my mind. But a few years ago, everything changed. My dad, who is my whole world, had a stroke. And the thought of waking up one day and not getting that "I love you, I miss you" phone call, I shattered into pieces. And that box came flying open. And it's in these moments, when that shame overwhelms, when that box flies open, that we decide what kind of person we are. Are you someone who gives up? Or are you someone who pulls themselves out of the dirt and fights for the life that they want? Because healing is an active choice. So I would wake up at 6:30 every morning and want to go back to bed. That's what my emotions wanted. I felt those emotions, but I faked the behavior. I got up anyway. My emotions said, don't go to the gym. So I faked the behavior. I went anyway. Now, of course, sometimes we do need that time in bed. Give yourself that time. But after a while of letting our emotions flood in, that laying in bed becomes redundant for emotional healing. So I would go to the office, and the last thing I wanted to do would work, but I'd work anyway. And I would go home on the bus and cry on the bus, go to bed and cry, and do it all again. But eventually, I started to feel better about my body because I was going to the gym. So I stopped crying through the workout. And then I stopped crying on the bus. And eventually, I stopped crying altogether because I realized that when I look back, I had built a life that I was proud of, and I was building a person that I was proud to be. Now, there's a really important point you need to remember here. When I talk about faking the behavior, I don't mean pushing to the point of burnout, but you do need to push beyond where you're comfortable. There's a difference between pushing for an 8-hour day and pushing for that 10-hour day. There's a difference between pushing for 3 workouts a week and pushing for 6. Self-care means engaging in behaviors that promote wellness. So sometimes that does mean curling in a ball, putting on Bridget Jones's Diary, and having a cry. But it also means getting out of bed when you don't want to because you know you need to. That's why introspection is so vital. You need to find balance. You need to learn your limits. And when it comes to shame, the feeling can be so overwhelming. But the only way out is through. We have to stop hiding from our shame and listen to what it is trying to tell us without letting it consume us. Maybe your shame is telling you that it's time to look yourself in the mirror and say that's enough. We are not confined to being the versions of ourselves in the past that we have been. I have been drug addict Abbie, I have been victim Abbie, survivor Abbie, lecturer Abbie, and I stand here today as Dr. Abbie. But one day, I will mourn her too. That's okay. That's growth. When I look back at the versions of myself that I have been, I don't feel overwhelmed by shame anymore. And while I continue to grieve for the parts of myself that I lost along the way, I feel hope for the person that I could be. And now I need you to listen to me. And I mean, listen. Who have you been? And what are you running from? Be honest with yourself. And now ask yourself, who do you want to be? Because after all, we are all just a work in progress. Thank you.